Are you someone who says they want to become wealthy, or do you want to actually become wealthy? Because everybody says they want to become wealthy. I mean, who doesn't want to fly around in first class and have nice cars? But actually getting there takes more work, sacrifice, and discipline. And it starts by understanding what is the purpose of the cash that you have. Because for the average person, when you think about getting an extra $1,000 or $10,000 or $100,000, we think in terms of spending. If I had an extra $1,000, what nice thing could I buy for myself? Could I get myself a new watch? Could I go on a fancy dinner? Could I go out and get myself something really nice? If I had an extra $10,000, what car could I get as a down payment? What vacation could I go on? What Rolex could I buy? If I had an extra $100,000, could I get myself a Lamborghini? We think in terms of spending, but when you start to look at what wealthy people do and people who become wealthy, they look at their cash very differently. They don't think about their cash in terms of spending. They think about, how can I turn this $1,000 into $2,000? How do I turn my $10,000 into $30,000? And how do I turn this $100,000 into $1 million? They think about earning cash as a way to make more cash, while everybody else thinks about generating cash as a way to pay for their bills or to get something nice. And the reason why is because wealthy people are focused on growth. Not just growth of their mind, growth of themselves, but also growth of their money. Because they want to generate this cash to create more cash flow. They want to turn this cash into assets. And that thinking is what's going to either allow you to become wealthy or continue paying every other wealthy person, because every time you make money, you're making Gucci rich, you're making BMW rich, you're making Rolex rich, you're making a landlord rich, you're making a whole bunch of people rich. It's just not you. And so now what's happening is you're going to work every single day, you're working hard, but you're working hard not to make yourself rich, you're working hard to make everybody else around you rich. And if you want to work hard to make yourself rich, it's going to require some sacrifice. And this is the really difficult and unique part. Because when you realize this, the first thing that's going to end up happening is you're going to have to make a sacrifice. And you're going to now go from looking rich to looking broke, even though you're more financially savvy now than when you were before. If you were making $70,000 a year, you were driving around in a BMW, you had a nice apartment, you had a nice watch, you were going on some fancy vacations. Well, now you realize if I make $70,000 and I spend all my money, I'm never going to be able to become wealthy because Delta taking my money, my landlord's taking my money, I'm spending all my money. Well, now you stop spending. You go from a BMW to a Toyota, you downsize on your apartment, you don't go to Cancun as much, you stop going to Benihana's. Now all of a sudden, you look like something's wrong because you got a beat up car, you downsize where you're living, you're not spending and lavish and having this extra extravagant lifestyle. You just are spending less. And now people start to wonder if something's wrong with you because you're making these sacrifices. But now what happens? Your bank account starts to grow for the first time. You have some extra cash because maybe you don't have a car payment anymore. Maybe you don't have such an expensive rent payment anymore. You don't have to keep paying for all of these expensive things that you had. And now you have some extra cash, so that's the sacrifice stage. Then what happens is you gotta start making your investments. Because if you keep that cash in the bank, well, it's better than spending your money. But then what ends up happening is your cash in the bank starts to get eaten up by inflation. We know what inflation is now, and I talk about this because the first time my YouTube channel, Minority Mindset, went viral was in 2016. And the reason why it went viral is because I made a video talking about inflation in 2016.
The price of things go up by 3% a year. It's called inflation. That means if a pack of gum costs $1 on January 1st, at the end of the year, it will cost you $1.03 to buy.
I was talking about how inflation is 2 to 3% a year, and your savings account back then was paying 0.03% a year. And so you're losing 2 to 3% of your money in savings. And that was a new concept for a lot of people in 2016, and that video went viral. Well, today, a lot more people know what inflation is because of what happened during the pandemic. But inflation hasn't gone away. Just because the inflation rate has fallen doesn't mean that inflation is no longer a problem. And so if you were to save money in the bank, that's better than spending your money, but the savings that you have in the bank is still being eaten by inflation. even if you have a high yield savings account. And you will say, well, Jaspreet, if I have a high yield savings account, isn't my interest rate higher than the inflation rate? Well, maybe, but remember, the average inflation rate is the average inflation rate. It's not always the real inflation rate that you're playing, and it's the average inflation rate based off of reported numbers. Remember, the reported numbers say that grocery prices have gone up by a little bit more than 20% over the last 5 years. So a $100 cart of groceries in early 2020 should cost you about $120 today. I think the average person who actually goes to the grocery store knows that that's not true. So sure, you might be able to beat the average reported inflation rate, but the reported inflation rate isn't always your inflation rate. Not to mention, if you take a look at the highest inflation rate numbers, it's things like housing, it's things like car insurance, it's things like food. These are things that a lot of people need. And those might be even higher than the average inflation rate. And that's where you have to know how the numbers actually work. Not to mention that when you earn that 4% or 4.5% in interest from your high yield savings account, you also have to pay taxes on that money. So even though you're generating 4 to 4.5%, you might only be netting 2 to 3% after taxes. And then you have to see, are you actually beating inflation or not? So when you keep your money in the bank, you might not actually be beating inflation. And at the very least, you might not actually be growing. I mean, maybe you're staying the same, but now let's talk about growth. Because if you're working this hard to save your money and your money is just sitting there stationary, well, you're not getting the biggest bang for your buck. And I say this because I've seen this happen in so many traditional Indian households. And this happens with a lot of immigrant families, but I'll talk about the Indian family because that's how I grew up. When you come from a foreign country like India, you come to the United States with $20 in your pocket, like many Indian immigrants did, that's how my dad did. You work very hard and you don't want to risk losing your money. So what do? You save money. It's a save-heavy culture. You work extremely hard to make money and then you save every penny possible because you don't want to risk losing it. But what if you could actually grow that money? This is what wealthy people are focused on doing. This is what real wealth is, because if we take a look at what wealth is, and I'm going to focus just on me for now. I'm not going to talk about all the other definitions out there. I'm not going to talk about what your financial advisor says. I'm not going to talk about what Investopedia says. I'm going to talk about me. For me, wealth is when the cash flow from my investments, my passive investments, not my business, my passive investments, is more than my expenses. I'm wealthy. Why? Because my passive investments, and I use the term passive investment kind of loosely here because when I invest my money in dividend paying stocks, yeah, it's passive, but I still monitor my portfolio. When I invest in real estate, yeah, it's passive for me because I spent years building a good team. I spent years learning how to make it passive. The first few years of me investing in real estate, it was anything but passive. Now, it is very passive, but I still review my monthly reports. I still have quarterly meetings with my property manager. I still go out to the properties sometimes. I'm still working to acquire more properties. There's still work, but I'm not actively working in it. But when those investments are covering all of my lifestyle expenses, that's what wealth is. Now, how do you actually get there? Well, you don't have to follow my definition of wealth. Some of you might say, I don't care about cash flow. I don't want dividends. I don't want rental income. I want to see growth in my investments. That's fine. I just had a conversation with somebody over the weekend at an event where he was saying, you know what, Jaspreet, I'm young. I don't really care about cash flow because I don't want to worry about those taxes. I'd rather invest in high growth things. Perfect. As long as you know your strategy and why you're doing it, there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is so many people have zero idea of what they're doing. They have zero strategy and then they just throw their money into something. And then they hope that they get rich quick very fast. And this is where we got to break it down, right? You started with the sacrifice. Now we got to get into the consistency. And you have to know what the game is for you. Because now you're not spending all of your money, but you have to actually do something with that money that you're putting aside, because we now know that saving your money is a guaranteed loss. How? Because number one, if you're getting high yield savings accounts, you're gonna have to pay taxes, and then the real inflation rate is probably gonna be higher than the amount of money you're making from the high yield savings account. So your savings are losing value slowly. And if you really wanna grow, you have to own assets. And this is where you got to know the game that you want to play. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in a year. It's not going to happen in 2 years. I call it a decade of sacrifice, and I call it a decade of sacrifice because you're going to have to go through a decade of spending less and earning more so you can invest like crazy. And most people will not tell you this because they're trying to sell you some get-rich-quick scheme because no one likes the idea of, here's how you can get rich in 10, 15 years. It doesn't sound very attractive. But this is the reality that many people will not tell you, that a lot of people are scared to tell you. If you want to build wealth through your investments, which is really what wealth is, it's going to take time. It's going to take a decade. Might even take longer than a decade. But you're going to have a completely different financial life over those 10 years where you're not even going to be able to recognize yourself, and you will see that light. But you got to stay consistent with your investments, because now what you're doing is you're working to make money. And you're not spending all of your money, and now you're working to take that extra money. Some of it you're going to save for emergencies, but now you're going to actually work to put that money into assets that are going to grow for you and make you money even when you're sleeping. If you enjoyed this clip and you want to continue your financial education journey, I have another video that I think you'll love. All you got to do is click that button right over there. And for those of you who want to stay up to date on the top finance and business news, you can join Market Briefs, my free financial newsletter, by clicking that button below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.